Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Teacher Talks. My name is Christopher Hansen. I have the distinct privilege of serving my community as the Director of Music Education and Orchestral Activities at Seattle Pacific University. Teacher Talks are sponsored by the Falcon Feathers. This is a student organization on campus. Feathers stands for the Future Educators in the Arts, Transforming Human Experience and Realities. This is a wonderful group of students that have all dedicated their career interest into serving others through the arts and education. This originally started as an opportunity to stay connected with those students when the pandemic hit Seattle in late spring of this past year. We wanted to stay connected somehow, and technology offered us this incredible avenue to still speak with each other and be thinking about the arts and education. I'm so grateful for that. And as with a lot of ventures that people have tried during the pandemic, it has blossomed into this incredible opportunity to reach out to artists and educators and administrators and change agents all over the world that understand the transformative power of the arts and human experience. And so I'm so grateful to have with me today Mr. Peter Briggs, who's going to be telling us a little bit about himself and the extraordinary work that he's doing. I'm going to be supplying some links and some resources in the chat box while we're talking to make sure that you can stay connected to the work that he's doing as well. And I want to make sure that I invite you, as always, to join our conversation as you are able. So anytime you have a question or a comment, please feel free to put that into the chat. We're live streaming on Facebook and on YouTube, and both platforms will take those and send them our way. When we're able to bring you into the conversation, we absolutely will. So please feel free to participate. Again, thank you to everyone that's joining us. For those that are watching for the first time, again, make sure that you're participating. Feel free to add your comments and your questions. Teacher Talks, you might just see two people on the screen, but this is definitely about encouraging conversations in art and education. So please feel free to join. And those that are returning, it's so great to have you watching again. I'm excited for you to meet one of my new colleagues in the Pacific Northwest, Mr. Peter Briggs. Seattle Pacific University is a Christian institution. And so, as is our tradition in our teacher talk, I like to start with just a brief moment of prayer and reflection. Whatever prayer means to you, however you participate in that, this really is just a moment to be grateful for this opportunity to connect with others during this extraordinary time. Would you please join me? Lord, thank you. Thank you for the technology that allows us to stay connected. God, as we physically distance ourselves appropriately to wane the incredible impact of this pandemic on our lives, we pray that we cannot distance ourselves emotionally and spiritually and intellectually, that we can stay connected and think of the extraordinary gifts you've given us and ways that we can connect with others through the arts and education. Thank you for Peter and the amazing work that he is doing. I pray that the words that we share today inspire others, for them to either connect with him through Sound Ed and the many projects that he's doing, or to simply start their own conversations in their own communities to better serve their students. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, Peter, again, thank you so much for the time. And please tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of where you're coming from and what you're doing right now. Oh, no, I think we might have lost the signal, but that is okay. I will wait for Peter to jump back on. Um, I am hesitant to offer some of his background because I'm sure that he's going to share it. He's currently a public school teacher and running an incredible program, and has started a nonprofit organization called Sound Ed that helps supports educators actually all over Washington and abroad. And so I want him to be able to share that with you. It's one of the reasons that I wanted to have him. But we'll see if we can get his connection going again. I think he's trying to join us now. So while he's doing that, I know we have a few viewers. If you already have some questions or things that you are curious about, please feel free to add those. I can bring those into the conversation with Peter when he rejoins us, or happy to address some of those while we're waiting for him to get reconnected. I feel honestly quite blessed that this is the first time that I think we've had technological difficulties like this. So we've had a pretty good run considering that this should be our 37th episode, I think, and haven't had any feed cut out like this. But hopefully, Peter will be coming back in just a second. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to add those into the chat box. And I will, let's see if I can connect with Peter real quick and get him back on. Please stay tuned. There we go. I think we got you back. Yay, technology.
Yay, technology.
This is one of the many struggles of all educators, I think, right now. I can remember, being in the public school classroom, and every time I had a lesson plan that integrated technology, it never
Right.
failed. As many times I checked the wires or the connection, something would happen. But I shared right before you came back, we had a pretty good run because this is our 37th episode, and that was the first
Yeah.
time I think something like this happened. So I am grateful that we got so many good times in. I'm glad that you're reconnected. And I
Yeah.
want to shoot it back over to you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're coming from, and what you're doing right now.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for extending grace for our connectivity issues. It's one of those things, but I appreciate that, and I'm sorry about all that. So I have been teaching music for 16 years, I think, long enough that I've started to lose count, I guess. I started with middle school band and choir in a little suburban school here outside Tacoma in a city called Fife, and really, really loved doing middle school. And then I took a job as a music and youth pastor at a church in Oak Harbor. And they called me in July and was like, hey, we lost our funding grant for your position, and we still really want you to come work at our church. We just can't pay you. And so I was scrambling to find a job, and I ended up getting a job at Lincoln High School in Tacoma. And they had just fired the band teacher and the choir teacher because they were caught up in the excuses of the inner city, all of the reasons why things couldn't happen or wouldn't work. And so the programs had dwindled to the point where at a comprehensive high school of 1,500 kids, I was the band teacher, the choir teacher, and the orchestra teacher. And getting that job has absolutely changed my life. It's changed my perspective. It's changed my understanding on what music teaching is, on the value of what we do. And just looking back, I've been at that school now, I think 12 or 14 years, 12 years, and have really, really enjoyed every minute of teaching there. The quick jump to the end is we were able to hire a choir teacher a couple years in because the choir program had grown so much. And now she was part-time for a year and now is full-time, also doing some musical theater classes. And then a couple years ago, we hired an orchestra teacher part-time. So in contrary to many of the trends in music education, our little inner city school has really been growing in our value and understanding of music. And but I look back at my experience having grown up in a not diverse suburb of Washington and gone to study music at Central Washington University. I was just so curious and fascinated to learn about all the experiences that my students had. And I just felt like my attitude in coming into the program, sort of knowing that it was failed and that I was quite possibly the only person that applied for the job, I just wanted to get beyond excuses and find a way to make it work. Like, there's always reasons why you can't, but let's find the reasons why you can. And so I think that, looking back on it, that, and combined with just an innate comfortability in who I am, walking in as a bow tie wearing, skinny Poindexter white guy and just being cool with that, and like, this is who I am, and help me understand who you are, enabled for a real perspective to be comfortable with the kids and for them to be comfortable with me, and for us to build a space where that kind of growth could occur. The other thing is, I just realized so early on in my experiences teaching at Lincoln how much I had to learn. And I honestly, I still keep in touch with some of those kids from the first couple of years. I feel like they taught me more about what it was like to be a kid growing up in Tacoma, a student of color, a foster kid, involved in gangs, like all those things. Oh my gosh, I had a kid. So we had 3 kids in the orchestra class, right? So, and I'd never taught orchestra before other than methods courses in college. So I just sat down and we'd play quartets, right? Making it work. Well, for our first concert, one of the kids told me that he was a little shy about it, but he's like, some of my bros and I, we have this like fight thing that we have to do at this like broken old shut down middle school. And I was like, it's okay, Jovan, just like sock somebody in the face and come after, like it'll be fine. Like I was totally joking, and just trying to like play around with the kids. But he, at our concert, the three other of us were on stage. He walked like 6 minutes late to the concert, in full on sweats, like totally disheveled, had his violin and bow in one hand, like no music or anything, like walks up on stage and sits down. And I was like, Jovan, so good to see you. You know, like he had gone to this like gang fight and come to his orchestra concert afterward. And I just remember being, first of all, so aware of how much I had to learn about their experience and about what made these kids tick and about what role music really played in their lives. And also just so totally honored to be working with these kids and to be able to provide them the space to come to know who they are and to use music as a tool to grow the kids. And I, one of the things that I say all the time is that if you want to inspire your students, you have to be inspired by your students. And I think that's one of the perspective altering things is I am inspired every day by how hard my students work, by the perspectives and passions that they bring into the classroom. There is no good reason for them to be as successful and talented and driven and passionate. I mean, they have teachers previous to me that had completely given up on them. And then walking in and getting to know the kids and just constantly finding my inspiration to work harder, to stay passionate. Another kind of shaping mindset moment for me was the first time I took that group to a band contest. And we were sitting in the audience. I was just glad everyone showed up and had an instrument. But sitting in the audience watching one of our local schools in full tuxedos and matching gowns playing, you know, amazing music. And this one girl turned around and she's like, Mr. Briggs, why did you bring us? We don't deserve to be here. And I looked at her and I said, you know what? I totally understand. I get it. I see where you're coming from, but I'll be honest, I'm proud of what we've worked on. And I feel like what we have to say matters, and we have worked hard, and I'm excited to share what we have to say with the audience. And I think, I think what we have to say matters. And that really started to make a shift in my mind of, yes, I spend a lot of my time on the technical stuff, like how to make music, which buttons make which sound, and all of that stuff. But I am really cognizant of always bringing it back to the, what do you have to say? And how are you going to use music to say that? And what you have to communicate to the world is what we need to hear. And just bringing it back to that place of using music to grow kids in a way that empowers their voice and their understanding of finding their place in the world. And I just think that is really important. That same season, that first year or two, I had a kid who was telling me like, you work too hard for us. We don't even deserve to have you here. And I was like, what does that even mean? And it just, it caused me to realize how much affective and interpersonal work we do. It's much more, I think it's a part of good teaching in general, but I think working with the at-risk youth, it's an essential piece of what we do. So sort of fast forwarding, in the last couple of years, I've kind of branched out. So many of my first years was just like head stuck in the zone of surviving through my school. And I think that that's really indicative of a lot of teachers in Title I programs is we feel very alone and isolated. The problems feel very unique to us because there isn't a lot of support or connection or recognition in the systems of music education that we circle in. And so I just spent a long time really just paying attention to what was right in front of my face. And the past couple of years, I've branched out a little bit more to support and to influence and to inspire in some different ways. So one of those is the Sound Ed, which is a side hustle of mine where I'm doing professional development and working primarily with teachers, not just music teachers, although definitely music teachers. I've done some trainings on culturally responsive music teaching. I've done some guest lectures at universities and done more and more presentations at conferences. I did a national music ed conference in Dallas, Texas, and I've presented at a lot of local conferences. But essentially, the crux of kind of the organizational focus of the professional development comes back to two pieces, and it's all about the philosophy and psychology that we implement in our classroom.
Absolutely.
So there's two pieces to that. One is trust psychology, which is if you have a high level of trust within your classroom or any community, you will have a high level of success as a result. That there's a direct correlation between establishing a foundation of trust that is a precursor to having safety and respect and relationship and positive risk taking and learning. And kids are not as defensive, but they're more open to going along and trying new things and feeling a sense of community before they're going to really engage. It's essentially the idea that correction without connection has no impact, that we need to, like, if we want to impact our students, there has to be a sense of connection before that correction is really gonna get in there. And so there's that trust psychology is kind of the center, and then it webs out to all these different perspectives on discipline, like how to discipline and manage your classroom, how to keep a personal balance and self-care in your life, and also instructional practices. That's all kind of related in there under that foundational principle. The second piece is growth pedagogy, which is the idea that if every interaction you had in your classroom was looked at through the lens of growth, how would things change? A simple one is mistakes just become opportunities for learning. So we celebrate mistakes in my classroom because that's when we actually get to roll up our sleeves and get to work. And a lot of times, especially in music, we tend to be error detectors and problem fixers. The challenge there is if we're focusing on what's going wrong or if we're focusing on what we're fixing, the perspective is, the outcome is different than if we're always focused on growth. And so another easy example for teachers is when a student will walk into your class tardy. 90% of teachers out there are going to go to the problem and like talk about why the kid was tardy. But we, in looking through growth pedagogy, are looking at welcoming the kid into the classroom and helping them find a place where they want to solve their own problem of coming to class on time. So it's not about punishment, it's about the student growth, and it's about always going to solution and speaking our vision for the students to them. Like, I get to dream dreams for my students until those dreams become a part of their reality. So that becomes a teaching principle in that if it's a simple interaction with a kid, or if it's even rehearsing, it's not, wow, that wasn't together. It was like, what would this sound like if we, right? Like casting that dream for excellence and having those rigorous and high expectations to the point where the kids start to embrace and understand that growth mindset and that positive direction for where they're going. So, so that's kind of Sound Ed and what that has become. And it's been, I haven't done as much with it because, surviving a pandemic has been a lot. So I was doing some of my own classes, and also I've done building trainings with 4 or 5 different buildings that have brought me in to train their whole staff. And then I also recently I wanted to share about my new endeavor, which I'm just kind of embarking on, and that is more on the cultural responsive side of my training. Just thinking more and more about the need for active engagement around diversity and equity within music education. And so so I've been, I spent most of the summer, that's actually how I met you, was going down a list of respected colleagues and people that would say, oh, you've got to talk to this person. And I must have interviewed 25 different people over the course of the summer. College professors, people in the college success, like scholarship and diversity from universities and local nonprofits to ask about, the nonprofit space. And I talked to industry insiders with Yamaha Education and with Conselmer. And I was really thinking about what can I do, right? Like talking and teaching is valuable work, but I feel like there's more that can be done. And just dreaming about what would it look like to organize a nonprofit here in our community with that kind of laser focus to support access and equity. And there were really some experiences that I've had working with students that have reinforced why that's so valuable. Just seeing my students that have gone on to university music programs and them just not fitting in, or recognizing that the systems that they were engaged in were set up by and for students that had different experiences than them. Mm-hmm. They were saying things like, every one of these students went to Allstate, and every one of these students listens to the same playlists, and they're all talking about these composers as if I should know who they are, or they're talking about, in the classes, they're assuming that kids have this foundational experience of music education, and that just wasn't their interest or experience. And so watching the kids struggle has been a challenge. And I understand a lot of the why behind why the systems are the way they are. But I also think that there's a lot that we can do to have a positive impact in our space. So I've been looking at starting the Elevate Music Foundation. And there's really 3 pieces of that. One is engagement with teachers and professional development. So working to provide teachers in Title I schools the support, the networking, and the resources to really thrive. A lot of times, similar to my experience, the teachers who end up in Title I schools are under-experienced and under-resourced and often left alone. It's often the jobs where teachers will cycle through without really establishing roots and building a program. And it's been interesting. I call it the Maslanka effect, where I will have university students that come to do practicums or observations with me, and they're like, yo, Briggs, what you're doing with these kids is like incredible. And this program is totally inspiring, but I want to teach at a school where I can do Maslanka, or I want to teach at a school where we can play Granger or Holst, right? And I get it. I mean, I remember what I was like in college, where the height of your musical experience is these reputable and powerful composers and, the traditions of the wind band repertoire or whatever discipline you're in. But I also think that there's more to the perspective of what we're doing. I've done a lot of reflecting about product and process, and that a lot of times we end up being so product focused that that's really the goal, is high quality music, with as much integrity and beauty as possible. I think early on in my teaching at Lincoln, I swung the full opposite side, and I was thinking just about process. Who cares what the music actually sounds like? We're making music together, and that's what's valuable and important. I actually think that I've changed recently to see a merging of those two, that the product is the process, right? It's not just the music, but the process of growing kids with music and the process of learning how to create and express. That process is the product, and the product is the process. And I'm trying to redefine kind of both what I had thought as a dichotomy of one or the other, and really see them connected in a similar way. And so I think I would like to see the Elevate Music Foundation engaging with college students in a way that can open their eyes to not just the need for valuable engagement in historically marginalized communities, but also the power of the experience of sharing music with kids in non-traditional formats, and thinking more broadly about what music education can be. I think in a lot of ways that new and upcoming students are going to be able to lead that charge in ways that even I, won't be able to see and envision. And so kind of empowering them to think more broadly and kind of blur the lines about where music education can go, I think will be a valuable piece.
Let me ask real quick, because this is brilliant, first and foremost. I'm so excited that you're doing this work, and especially this newest piece with Elevate Music. And I want to hear, I heard you say there were kind of three components, and you've only talked about the one, but I really want to circle back to something that sort of dinged my ear right at the beginning of this, because this is a conversation I've been having with colleagues and my students who are future music educators.
Sure.
This idea of success. And I want to go back to sort of the beginning of your story when you say that you approached Lincoln High School where this band and this choir director were not successful.
Right.
Where is that narrative coming from? Because a part of it sounds like they did not see themselves successful. They did not see their students successful. But is there also an administrative community or a community component? How was success being defined at that time? And then do you think that definition of success has changed since you've been there?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question. I think I never quite understood where the internal narrative from the students was coming from. But there is sort of a defeated or deflated sense of efficacy. The thought that they can or will or should even be engaged in high-level music is not something that they're coming with naturally. It's something that they develop as a part of seeing what's happening in the program.
But what do you mean by high-level music?
Good. I'm not sure specifically because I think what I see as high level of music would not necessarily match a lot of other programs, or values externally. But I think when I'm saying high level of music, I'm saying pursuing and growing with rigor and passion, studying music, developing skills. And even that process, I've had to go back and redefine and develop a very, very structured program for individual student development. My kids don't get private lessons. I maybe have out of, a couple hundred kids in our program, we probably have 2, maybe 3 that are getting private lessons on a regular basis. So I, knowing that my kids weren't going to be getting private lessons, I developed a 6-year sequence of scales or rudiments, individual instrument exercises, and short solos that it's a portfolio project essentially. And they work on different levels over the course of their term. So I've had to be really structured and kind of spoon feed a lot of that musical development for them. But I think getting back to the why of where that comes from is just this it's my hamartia, right? Like the Shakespearean tragic flaw. is this inherent optimism that I have, and it's this sense of always staying on the positive side, even in the midst of looking truly at the reality that's in front of me. But I teach my students to use the language instead of saying your accents are too high. They'll say your sticks need to be lower, right? Even in our discourse about the subject or about each other, we speak the positive truth to each other, and it's saying the same thing. Instead of saying you're too loud, I say play quieter, right? I'm asking for what I want, and I'm teaching the kids to speak that, which is just a huge life skill. I want my own kids or my students to have the ability to engage with problems in their life, and to have, rather than saying I'm hungry, to have them go straight to I need or I want, right? I want food or I need food, to be able to get through the problem as a mindset and go straight to solution. And I think that sense of positive teaching pedagogy is really what it is, combined with that sense of getting beyond excuses, and we'll find a way to make it work. Like the belief that we can has been really foundational in establishing that as part of the kid culture in our program.
It's interesting to me because we have, and we had already shared this when we connected before, we have, very similar stories of working in Title I schools and battling a lot of the socio-political issues in music and education, not just within our communities, but how music education works, how it's perpetuated, how teachers are trained. And one of the things that I continually see myself coming back to is how success is defined. And I would argue my greatest challenges as a public school teacher came from that struggle to find a definition of success that all stakeholders could agree upon.
Sure.
I had an incredible turnaround of administration in my school district, let alone the campuses that I was working at. Just an extraordinary amount of turnaround. And it had kind of become a joke regionally that our district was called the stepping stone, that people would come in, they'd get their year of experience and, an assistant sup position so that they could then go be the superintendent in a small district. And people would just come and go. It was a revolving door. And with that, every administrator who was, which I don't wish that job on anyone, the extraordinary work they have to do. And I say that sincerely, with every administrator that came in, they have their own background, their own experiences, and their own definition of success. And that was so much of my work, was trying to encourage them to see, you're coming from this really large district, and this is what I'm an orchestra director, this is what that orchestra program looked like. And if I distinctly remember having that conversation with a principal, one of the last principals that I worked with, we were talking about our program, the orchestra program in particular, and what was going on and how we were developing it. And well, in so many words, because I don't need to give you all the details, but the idea was basically the principal was asking, like, well, why don't you do this and why don't you do that, with these really big expectations that we were playing certain repertoire and having rehearsals a certain way. I mean, things that, to be fair, even though you can tell them being defensive, things that this principal had no business talking about. They weren't a music educator, had never studied music, but they had been at a high school that had a wildly successful program, a very large program. So that was the experience they drew on. And it took, over a year of multiple meetings to say, what you're asking about is fantastic. And I don't want to diminish the success of my colleague. I know this director that you work with. I know their program. I know the community they live in. It's great. But we're in a small rural town. We don't have the resources of a large city. Our students don't have the financial means that those students had. These aren't excuses, as you pointed out. They are realities. And so I see those realities, and rather than, this was a pivotal moment for me. And so I'm curious in just how you talk about it. And this is why I bring up this conversation about success. It took me years, I'd say about 5 years of teaching, before I started to recognize that my dreams and my aspirations were not what was important, because I was coming into my classroom with, I've had this brought up so many times in the past month, this Miss Lanka effect, that what I experienced as success is what my students have to experience in order to be successful,
Mm.
rather than really appreciating. And I know I have seen this, but I struggle to find really solid examples of what I consider culturally responsive teaching, in which we can appreciate what our students are bringing into the classroom.
Right.
The very first time, I'll never forget this. We had this awesome program with the Austin Lyric Opera. Uh, they had this night of opera where the dress rehearsal would be opened up to public school students. So I'd always take my kids to go see the opera, and for a staggering majority of my kids, it was about 95% of the students, because we had to get grant money to buy the bus to take them and everything. So we had these statistics available. For about 95% of the students, it was the very first time that any of them had seen a live orchestra.
Right.
And I remember that happening. That was in year 4 of my teaching, talking about that on the bus going back. And I immediately thought, what am I doing? That I'm pushing having a symphony orchestra at my high school, and I'm getting all this rep in front of them. And it is in no way to villainize Western art music. It's in no way to say that it doesn't have significance. But I was pushing on them a definition of success that I was given, that I inherited. And it was in that moment that I thought, well, of course they're not playing Tchaikovsky the way I would imagine it, or of course they're not engaging with this repertoire the way I would imagine it. They've never even heard it. It's not a part of their life. It's not a part of their existence. It doesn't have the internal meaning, the intrinsic benefits that I want it to. So how am I bringing that into my classroom? How do I facilitate conversations around Western art music to contextualize it, to show them the human beings that wrote it? How can I play things that's not just Western art music, especially as an orchestra conductor? There are other ways of making music. And I think the challenge that I have with conversations around social equity and teaching at Title I schools and engaging students in low socioeconomic environments, those conversations to me become very quickly othered. That we get the savior mentality of, I'm coming in and I know better and I'm going to get these students to see past their reality, rather than Maxine Green is a thinker that I quote all the time. I love her quote. She says, the greatest challenge of educators is to help others find themselves. And what I feel like I see coming out of the rhetoric of culturally responsive teaching and Title I schools and all this, what I feel like I'm seeing from so many educators is, I've got to come in and save these kids and show them what their success looks like. And you can see how divisive that is, rather than, I'm going to come in to learn who these students are. And we are going to find out what success looks like. And if that success never is materialized as a festival that we go to, if that success means that we don't participate in all state and solo and ensemble, then we're going to be successful. And I think that is the hardest conversation for educators to have, because I feel like we take it to a certain point and we're afraid to go all the way, because then we break down and we register kids for all state, or the principal says, how come you're not going to any festivals? Okay, well then we'll go to a festival. But I don't know why that has to be the definition of success. I'll add one more thing, because I want you to respond to this. Like when you talked about private lessons, why are private lessons a pillar of success? Why is that evidence of great musical achievement? Because I had the fortune of studying as an undergrad at an historically Black institution that was populated with students that you're talking about, that didn't have private lessons, that didn't have, and it wasn't just Black students. I mean, students of all color, of all backgrounds, that were coming in, like myself, grew up, relatively poor, on welfare, didn't have private lessons, but wanted to make music, that were phenomenal musicians that couldn't read music, that were incredible improvisers and played in multiple genres. And even in that situation, we were being forced, for lack of a better word, but really forced to say, well, if you want to be a music educator, if you want to be a successful musician, you're going to have to do these things. And very seldom being able to have the conversation of why does it have to be that way? Because my cousin is a professional musician and is making a ton of money doing these gigs, and I want to do that. Well, if you want to do that, then you don't get a bachelor's degree. But why can't I get? So what are your thoughts? I know I threw a ton of stuff at you, but to me, it's all about success, how we're defining success.
So I'll get to actually the second pillar of the Elevate Music Foundation is relevant and responsive curriculum. So we'll bench that and I'll come back to it in a second. But on the idea of success, I think there were a couple of factors that I benefited from at Lincoln. One was because I was coming and essentially taking over a failed program, the admin didn't anything I did. They were so hands off because there were no expectations. And so Tacoma is unfortunately a big enough district that there isn't a lot of support or organization in the arts. There was at the time, we had an arts facilitator, and we've not had a direct coordinator for arts. Our current arts facilitator also covers PE and health and librarians and I don't know, custodians, or I don't know.
Wow.
They're just so disconnected that there really is a sense of I really could do whatever I wanted and no one was looking over my shoulder. So I was fortunate in that sense. I think the other thing that really worked in my favor is I had a number of experiences, more stories for another time, of how much I had to learn about students at Lincoln. And I just came in with this innate curiosity to get to know my kids. And I don't take credit for this. It wasn't an intentional mindset, but it just sort of happened that I didn't want to recreate what the other schools were doing. There was the North End School with, history of phenomenal programs and going to the bandmasters flying across country and performing everywhere. I just felt like it was ridiculous for us to try and be that. And I think it was maybe a self-preservation. Like, there's no way we're going to achieve that standard, so forget that standard. But what I was approaching is, if that's them, who are we, right? If that's what they do because that fits their school, what is going to fit our school? And a couple months in, I had 2 band classes at the beginning with about 25 students between both classes. And 11 of those 25 students were drummers. And 2 of those drummers could actually read music. So one of them was sitting with me in my office. He was a sophomore at the time. And he's like, "Yo, Briggs, I think we should start a drum line." And I was like, "All right, well, tell me more. What do you mean by a drum line?" And like, we looked at some stuff on you. Mind you, this was like 2008, right? We looked at some YouTube videos online and we found some cool stuff. And he's like, "I really think we should start a drum line." And we didn't have a lot of drumline equipment. So I went to my principal and he let me put all the wind players in one class and the 11 drummers in another class. And so we started a drum line at the school. And they were doing a lot of, making beats and playing stuff around. And I just had them playing all the time, playing at assemblies, playing out in front of the school. We rode a city bus down to play at an art museum. We were just doing all kinds of stuff. And a couple of the students got bored with the music that they were playing and asked if I could give them more stuff to work on. And I gave it to them in notation form. And so they came and asked me. And when those kids came back the next day with new songs that they had learned from notation, like, I never pushed it or said, like, this is what you have to do. We did all of it. We did learning by rote. We did like playing, the first football game we went to, some guy started playing a beat on the drum set and kids next to us started getting up and singing the rap song. They like recognized the hook. I just realized that I had more to learn from them. And I think that sense of defining their success by facilitating a program that represents them and provides a space for them to be who they are and to use music as a tool. I think maybe that's another piece of it too, is I don't over, what's the word I'm looking for? Revere music itself. Music is not the end in my classroom. It's just the means, right? I use music to grow kids. And music is just a tool for helping them become better humans, helping them learn self-discipline and communication and reflective analytical study and like all of the other things, and the ability to express themselves in a language that goes beyond words, right? Like that's the end, is the kids. And I think because I have kept the kids as the focus of my success, whether we're doing drumline music or Vaughn Williams or Eric Whitaker, right? Like it doesn't particularly impact in the same way. And it freed me from a lot of the conventional expectations of what music programs should do.
Now, I think what scares me though is, do you fear? This was another thing I had to come to grips with. It was around year 7 for me. I was frustrated with my administration, and I was feeling a sort of call to transition. I had been at the same school, the same district the entire time. I'd bounced between the middle school and the high school. And I remember one of my mentors telling me I built to the program to a place that I was really proud of what we were doing and what we were accomplishing. And my mentor had recognized that I was the catalyst for so much of what was going on.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, she looked at me and she said, I want you to imagine, God forbid something bad happened, but let's say that you're not here tomorrow.
Right.
What happens to your program? Have you become the program? Is it Chris Hansen's program, or is it really the San Marcos High School Orchestra? Like,
Right.
How do people identify your program? And it was quite honestly a devastating realization for me that what I had built was Chris Hansen's orchestra program.
Sure.
And I was this, force to be reckoned with. I was loud and confident and always in service to my students and was super excited. But I had become so much of the success that I wanted to create.
Right.
Even though this was student-driven success, even though all of that was happening, I immediately recognized that I had essentially enshrined myself. And these were the words my mentor chose, which I appreciated because it was true. If I were to leave, I knew that the program would suffer. And I spent the next year doing absolutely as much as I could to externalize and to institutionalize the traditions that we had built, the success that we wanted to define. I am sad to say I don't know that I was as successful as I wanted to be in doing that, because ultimately I felt the call to transition into higher ed. I wanted to teach teachers. That was something I felt called to do, and I made that transition. And the program by no means is unsuccessful, but it is radically different than when I was there. And so I'm curious, I mean, without, sabotaging yourself, because I'm not asking you to throw shade at your colleagues, but do you feel that what you have built at Lincoln High School still exists for the orchestra and the choir now that you have colleagues that are there? And more importantly, do you feel that, especially with your work with Sound Ed and Elevate Music, do you feel that you've been a part of this sort of systemic change, or has it become enshrined in you? Like if Mr. Briggs goes to another school, do you think Lincoln High School will have made that sort of philosophical and pedagogical change that you're talking about, or is it going to go with you?
Well, ultimately, time will tell. I'm actually looking at maybe transitioning sometime soon. And so I have been having that same conversation with myself. But my hope is, and what I think is, that because the program grew out of the passion and interest of the students, I really feel like, regardless of the teacher, that passion and interest that makes what we have fit for Lincoln High School will remain. Now, obviously, the skill and the sometimes I think that the success of a music program is much more based on the disposition of the music teacher than science teachers or math teachers, right?
Absolutely.
Like the year-over-year programmatic element, you can't discount that in terms of the success of a program. So there is that sense of when you're leaving something that you have watched grow, like it is out of your hands. But in terms of, I think it is a result of my passion and personality and disposition. Absolutely. But I think it is a product of the students and their interest, which, if that's okay, then maybe I could segue into the responsive and relevant.
Oh, please.
I think that I have really, I've had a couple of experiences that have othered my students and their performances. A drumline experience where in a state level drumline competition, one of the judges spoke to one of my students and said we couldn't in good conscience give your school a trophy for playing in the style that you were playing in, but you guys were really incredible. We got 174 points, and the first place got 175 points out of 200 points. We were playing on slings, and my kids are like moving with their drums and like out at the audience, and the kids are flipping cymbals on bandanas. But the judges have this perspective of like drum corps, clean, like Garfield grip cymbals. And so I could argue backwards and forwards that what we're doing is technique. It's just different technique.
Yeah.
But from the judge's perspective, it's not what they see or value. And so that experience, among others, really caused me to think differently about the curriculum that we're offering kids. And I feel like in an English class, you absolutely need, it is critical to study Shakespeare, to understand the roots and the beauty found in the language and the history of why we're where we're at today. But you wouldn't only study that, especially with high schoolers. It is so critical for our students to see themselves represented in the characters, to look through literature at people like themselves that are wrestling with racial issues and identity and culture in a way that they see themselves reflected in the music. And yet I look at our music classrooms and I see what my students are listening to outside my classroom and what we're doing inside the classroom. There's such a chasm there. And so we've really been trying to in just mess around and allow ourselves to find things that do and don't work. And sometimes it's mashups that are awkward. We tried to create a like beat track to go underneath America the Beautiful a couple years ago, and it was terrible. And we all laughed and moved on, and like it just didn't work. But we've also found some composers like Alex Shapiro, who is doing concert band music written with a pre-recorded soundscape or beat track underneath it that really connects with my students. They just loved it. We've also been doing some transcriptions of pop music, more for pep band stuff. But once I started having them work with me, and we started doing stuff that they hear on the radio in the band classroom, I just saw a different side of my students come alive. And I have some former students who have been writing house and dubstep soundtracks to go along with our long tone warm-ups that we're doing, in remote teaching, and just trying to really be creative, because I think that finding culturally connecting the students to the work that we're doing is really critical. And it's not going to create ensembles or courses that look the same as the other programs, but having the freedom to explore and dream and make space so that there's opportunity and access for all the students to redesign. I feel that it's not a fixed system. When you're looking at equity and access, it's not saying, well, we're going to need to take resources from the traditional focus on Western music and reallocate that to other classes looking at composing with technology or whatever. I feel like we as teachers expand and grow and understand, and our profession as a whole elevates across the board with that broader focus on what music education could be or should be. And then I'll just throw in really fast, the third pillar of the Elevate Music Foundation is a scholarship mentorship program, where the focus would be on, it's called a posse model of scholarship, where students would be identified as juniors and then would get support through their senior year to help guide them through the audition process, with a mentor who is kind of working with them and supporting that process. And then a nominal like $2,500 scholarship for 2 years of undergrad that would continue that mentorship program, but also add a cohort model where all the students in the program are working together. So ostensibly, if we had 5 or 8 kids in the program, they wouldn't even have to be at the same universities, but they could network together digitally, remotely. And the systems that don't see or make space or recognize the value of students of color pursuing music education. I feel like the connection and network that would be gained through that would be a way that those of us in the music ed community that want to value and support those students joining our ranks, we could really help them get more steam to find their place and be able to make it through the music ed system. So yeah, so those are the three: professional development and supporting the right teachers in Title I, working towards developing culturally relevant and responsive curriculum, and then a mentorship scholarship model to help students grow and join our ranks.
You know, and I remember when we first talked, I really appreciated that conversation around what your students are experiencing as they're transitioning to higher ed, because this is something I'm personally really passionate about. I'm a first generation college student, very proud of that fact. And I love working with students that have the ambition to seek an education past high school and what that means for them. And this is something that I am desperate to see come to fruition as soon as possible, is trying to reimagine what our higher ed curriculum looks like for music educators.
Right.
Because I think it's almost, and this is controversial, and I mean it to be, it's almost counterintuitive to be working with students with diverse backgrounds. And that's not just talking about race and ethnicity, but whether it's gender identity or socioeconomic status or religious affiliation, when we're talking about the diversity of our student population and trying to bring that into our K through 12 curriculum, if we are then sending them into music education programs that is only going to revert back to what we're actively trying to change in public schools, it's completely counterintuitive. We're going to see their frustration. We're going to see a lack of retention, and rightfully so, because how could you have, found your voice and had all of these things come to fruition for you through music and your public school or private school program, and you graduate high school on fire, excited about giving back to your community the way that you were given to, and then you come into a program and get hit upside the book with a music theory textbook and, Grout and Poliska's music history, and it's going, no, we got to cram you back into the box that you were let out of if you want this degree. And
the playlist thing, where like the playlist that my students listen to in the classroom and out of the classroom, it's similar with higher ed in terms of the curriculum focus and priorities of higher ed is so disparate from what we actually experience in the classroom. And so I have a lot of optimism and hope. I know that I don't have the ability to influence or change those systems as it is. But I have seen places where that conversation is changing. Patty Bourne has been doing some phenomenal work up at Western, and where actually their policies and priorities are changing because of their perspective. And so I have seen and am excited to continue to be a part of some of those conversations as they're happening at around our state as well.
Well, and it's interesting the way you phrase it, at least from my perspective. I don't know that there is a disconnect between what higher education promotes and wants. I think that there's just a stalemate, because what is painful and awkward for me to witness is that if I'm stripping back, the romantic perspective that I like to have on what higher education is able to do, one that I believe is a reality, but one that doesn't necessarily recruit students. The idea that continuing your own education and benefiting yourself to have a new perspective of the world that you can share with others, I think that's the point of higher ed, and it's again too poetic to recruit students, but I believe in that. Now, that being said, as a college faculty member that has to go speak to students, the goal is that you understand getting a degree from this institution is going to make you more marketable when you leave this institution. You will secure a job, you will have a living wage, you will be able to be quote unquote successful. We get back to this word. You will be more successful because of what you have done at my institution than if you were to not come to my institution. And that is what drives, again, recruitment, retention, degree programs. We have to offer this degree this way because that's what's going to bring students here, and that's what's going to make them more successful. And ultimately, human beings want to be more successful. It's driven by capitalism. It's all right. So that's a conversation for another teacher talk. But that really is the idea. The reason I say there's this stalemate is because within the industry of music education, which includes higher ed, this is a K through 16 industry.
Yeah.
I hear so many of my colleagues publishing articles, writing books where we're talking about the change that's needed in public school, and yet we don't change how we're preparing our educators that are going to go into public schools.
Right.
And so then we're talking to public school teachers in the K through 12 arena, and we're saying, why is it that you do it this way? Well, that's the way I was taught in college.
Sure.
So everybody keeps pointing fingers of, well, we can't necessarily change this generation of educators because that's how they were taught. Well, we can't necessarily change how we are educating future educators because they're going to go student teach with these people that we have defined as successful because they're winning the festivals and going to the contests. And, you know, and again, this is a radical thing to say, but I've always been in that vein of, well, we're not going to know until we try.
Yeah.
I don't want to just keep perpetuating it because it just is. Otherwise, we're going to lose what we have. Well, who says we need to keep what we have? Why can't we go without it?
And I feel like if we are reevaluating our approach to how do I use music to grow the students that are in front of me, if I take my understanding of what the value of learning music is and where the students are and how do we connect those, whether you're working in an affluent community or a diverse community or like whichever community you end up in, that same perspective is going to lead you to be successful. I really feel like this, as I've been doing more and more training of teachers, across the country, I've been seeing it's not a different set of skills that is leading me to be successful. It's just essential with the students I have. You have to have that skill set to impact students in the inner city, but it's just good teaching overall. And so my optimism is that as the conversation comes back to, like you were saying, what is success actually? And as we drill down on what is successful teaching, what is connecting music with students, I think that can reframe the list of what good programs should, in a way that's valuable for all programs and all teachers.
I think this is so well said and a perfect place to put a bookmark. I can't believe it's already been an hour. It's amazing to me how fast the time goes. But I am going to tag you on another teacher talk. I want to continue these conversations, and I'm going to use the excuse of our technological difficulties to commit you to coming back, because this has been fantastic. Peter, again, I'm so grateful for your words of wisdom and experience, the amazing work that you're doing with Sound Ed and this new project with Elevate Music. I've put some links into the chat on YouTube and on Facebook. You can find out more about Sound Ed at sounded.org. And then I put a link to your Facebook post on Elevate Music. So please, for those of you that are hearing this conversation, whether you were a part of this live stream or if you're seeing it archived on YouTube, please connect with Peter through sounded.org and let him know that you're there to support him. Or if you want to do similar work, he's offering training and wonderful advice from the experiences that he's had. Keep the conversations going. That's the biggest thing. We're going to change this by talking about it, not ignoring it. Peter, we've got to have you back because I think there's so much more to discuss about not only the possibilities, but realities of what we're facing and how we're dealing with things. If you'll stay connected, I want to give you a personal goodbye. But for everybody else, I'll let you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And for so many of us that are already going into our winter breaks, I hope that you're staying healthy and safe. Again, as you physically distance yourself, do not distance yourself emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually. Stay connected however you can. Keep these conversations going and lean into the transformative power of arts and education. Look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Thanks, everybody.